All around us, there are expectations for how we should live our lives based on our gender.
These gender expectations set certain rules or ideals.
They tell us that the ideal man is a mythical 666, over 6 feet tall, 6 inches, and earning 6 figures.
They tell us that the hottest women are big-boobed e-girls and OnlyFans models with millions of followers.
These expectations tell us that when a woman has sex or enjoys it, she's a slut.
While men who don't want to have a lot of sex are called simps and not real men.
But who came up with these expectations?
We see them everywhere.
Who pays on the first date?
Who's allowed to show emotions?
What your body count is.
The clothes we wear.
The colours of the clothes we wear. From childhood toys to looks maxing, testosterone maxing.
Soft girl versus boss babe, trad wives.
And the high value woman narrative. Gender expectations shape our lives in all sorts of ways. Some are obvious, some subtle.
I think in some ways that I realised that there were different rules for how women and men were supposed to live and act when I was a child. So back when we were girls and boys.
Women being in the kitchen and men being in the garden, or women liking pink and boys liking blue and having certain interests.
To be tough, be physical, be aggressive.
Boys like trucks and girls like dancing. I think that's very socially conditioned. I think it comes down to, even the way that we afford little kids compliments. Girls are complimented on the dress that they're wearing, and then boys tend to be complimented on on their skills.
I think men are, definitely looked at as they're meant to be the protector, the provider, the strong ones, the ones that provide stability.
The man's the head of the house, and women are always so emotional, and there's always those stereotypes, especially within our culture, right?
I think emotion is a big one. The feeling that they can't talk about emotion or feel emotion, but women can be so emotional.
It's annoying because at times I've always wished I could just be seen as human, as a person, but I do feel like my gender's always at the forefront of that. I am at first a woman before I am a person, and that kind of controls every aspect of my life.
I wanted to do things like play soccer, I wanted to skateboard, I wanted to do all this stuff, but my dad was like, no, you're a girl, you can't do that.
Nice, polite girls don't do that, and young girls shouldn't do that. Leave that to the boys is something we hear often.
Something that I struggle with too is feeling inferior because I am a woman. Just learning to know that it's okay to have a voice, and just because, I identify as a woman doesn't mean that I'm less than a man.
In these discussions, it's easy to get confused between sex and gender. They're related, but they're not the same.
Sex is physical and biological. It's usually identified at birth based on physical traits. Hormones, chromosomes, and anatomy decide if someone is male, female, or intersex.
Then there's gender. Gender is social, a set of rules or ideas that tell us how society expects us to behave and look, based on our sex.
Gender is initially shaped by cultural expectations, but it's also shaped by our own personal identities, which can change and evolve over time.
It's important to understand the difference between gender expectations, the roles and behaviours society has for us, and gender identity, our individual sense of our own gender.
Today, we're talking about gender expectations.
Gender is a socially constructed concept, and because it's socially constructed, it comes with a set of norms and ideas around how certain people should behave or act.
Unfortunately, this can sometimes be warped to uphold misconceptions that can play a very big part in really silencing young women and young men in particular to speak up and voice their thoughts and to rebel upon stereotypes that are in place.
Given just my size, I'm 6'8", my appearance, just the way I present, people typically assume that should be hyper masculine.
Definitely, in male groups, there's probably a big stigma around gender norms and not venturing out from that.
I've seen gender norms be pushed on some of my close friends, from acting tough and trying to hide emotions more.
I'm not allowed to be vulnerable because, I'm a male, and I feel like that's something that I should be able to express.
TikTok trends, the news, music, movies, porn, they can all reinforce gender stereotypes.
You've probably come across a video on your feed of an influencer telling you what it is to be a man.
A real man.
Acting tough.
Being the moneymaker in the relationship.
Wooing women with these things so they want to date you.
Not showing affection for your mates.
Those videos you see on the street, And it's like, oh, how much do you think a man needs to earn to be worthy of dating you? And they say a ridiculous figure that is like 500,000 a year. A young man who could see that might think like, well, I might have to push harder until I can do that for my girl, sort of thing.
With all this content, they're expected to be a certain way. They're expected to go to the gym. They're expected to be making a lot of money, or expected to do a lot of things. And when they can't feel that, they feel that they're not good enough, and then start with like sort of mental health issues.
Some of these expectations form what we call the man box, and nearly 4 in 10 men say they feel pressure to fit into this box.
Research shows that men who closely follow these rules are much more likely to experience poor mental health or use violence.
And that can really limit their expression and also support them in not really connecting to who they are.
We're told to like bottle everything up, keep it quiet and just soldier on basically.
If I can't express myself, whether it's to my family or my friends, it feels like built up inside of you, and it's something that will get worse and worse, where I feel pressured, I feel alone. It's not nice.
I feel like I've been a slave to gender expectations my whole life in some ways. I think being someone who is maybe naturally not so masculine, had some, a bit more of a feminine vibe. I felt a lot of pressure as a young person to hide that part of myself, to shy away from that, to watch the movies that I was supposed to watch, and when I would just go home and like watch Mamma Mia or something, So I think it's been a part of my life for a very, very long time.
There are expectations of femininity too, and these can also harm women and girls.
They're expected to be overly nice and not too assertive.
Thin and attractive, but not care about our appearance too much.
And take up caretaker roles in families.
Of course, there are lots of gendered expectations around what a young girl or a woman should be. And those gendered expectations can be, she needs to be kind and caring and a caregiver and empathetic and giving and doing for others.
A softer, more submissive personality, someone that, cooks and cleans and provides for the family in a completely different way, meant to keep quiet, be polite, and is never the head of anything, is always kind of the follower.
I do love being a woman, but at the same time, I know I have to dispel a lot of the stereotypes and the myths and the expectations that come with that.
There is the expectation to be nurturing, to be kind, to kind of not be as strong, when it comes to being in the workplace.
You should be probably more quiet and tolerable.
Having to be perfect in what I do and what I wear and how I'll be seen as.
Finding a line between how I dressed and whether or not it was for myself and me feeling nice and feeling good, or if I felt like it was something I was presenting to other people. And I think any kind of expectations that we start to put on women or men, it makes people feel uncomfortable in who they are, which at the end of the day, it's not a nice feeling.
While we may not personally identify with these gender traits, and they're not all inherently bad, they can really mess with how we relate to each other.
Think about the fact that generally men are taught to see sex as a conquest, where sleeping with lots of people can get us clout, which means that we may be more likely to ignore boundaries to get what we want.
Now, consider that women are taught that sex is something they owe men, but at the same time, something that they eventually have to give up to them.
This dynamic creates a culture where sexual harm is inevitable.
In that dynamic where men ask and women give, men have all the power there. If that's how the system's set up, then they have too much room to abuse that power, and that's why we have issues with consent.
While not everyone buys into these expectations, most of us feel the pressure in some way.
Often what a man will say is that he feels all of this pressure to be manly, to want sex, to always be aroused or erect and ready to have sex at the drop of a hat. And if he doesn't necessarily relate with that idea of his gender or that expectation, it can feel really confronting, and it can feel like he's not living up to this idea of what it means to be a man.
That's where it comes back to men don't feel like a man if they haven't had sex.
It can make dating very difficult when people do feel this sense to kind of feed into a certain type of behaviour, or making sure they're doing something particular or saying the right thing.
Breaking free of these expectations can be difficult, but liberating at the same time.
I'm planning our wedding, so I'm really interested in design and styling. People often assume that that's an odd thing. You should be focusing on playing football. What are you doing?
When you get to a point where you can break away from those gender expectations, it feels so freeing. It feels like I get to take control of the narrative. It feels like I don't have to live by these expectations and rules that were thrust upon me from, people way back then. And it's quite beautiful.
Doing your own thing, even if it goes against gender expectations, isn't a new concept.
In fact, some of the most iconic movies ever made are about those very people who stepped outside of their gendered expectations to choose an activity they truly loved.
Another way that gender expectations really play out is sport.
But not all athletes are playing by the rules of gender.
I'm definitely not your girly girl. I didn't play with the dolls growing up. I was very much a tomboy and had no issue with that. And I don't think the people around me had any issue with that as well. And I was always treated like one of the boys.
When people meet me away from the game, they'll say, oh, you're different to what I thought you'd be, which reveals to me that there's some sort of construct in which people view footballers. And what I've been reflecting on lately is broadening that perspective and making a more expanded view of masculinity to incorporate toughness, not just in a physical sense, but being mentally tough to put your hand up and say, hey, I'm struggling here.
For a long time, I was the type of person who would keep a lot of things to myself, bottle it up. There might have been a few times here and there where maybe I went for a drink with mates and just had a bit too many, and that's me letting it all out, and that's not the right way to go.
Gender expectations don't exist in a vacuum. They're influenced by race, culture, religion, class, where you live, and whether you live with disability.
For some communities, there are traditional roles that can be protective or meaningful.
For example, for many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, colonisation disrupted historic gender roles that, while clearly defined, were often more fluid and diverse than what we see in the Western world today.
In First Nations cultures and in Pacific Islander cultures, we have very specific men's business and women's business and how that interacts in every aspect of life, not just in relationships.
I think with my culture, there's definitely a traditionalist value. It's like very much based on those types of ethics and morals.
And for a lot of us, cultural traditions give us a sense of meaning and connection. And in many cultures around the world, these traditions can be linked to gender.
The real question isn't whether we should ditch them altogether, but how they can evolve in a world where we are free to be the best versions of ourselves without confines. Because it's possible to honour heritage while creating space for people to try new things that they traditionally may not have been allowed to do.
Like women holding leadership positions or playing contact sport.
Or men being full-time fathers or pursuing careers like nursing and teaching.
You still can be respectful to your culture, like doing stuff like that is not disrespecting your culture. Like stereotypes and stuff like that, that's just the way people in my culture were raised.
One of the biggest gendered expectations that I really face, and I think it's really coupled with being a Chinese woman as well, is the expectation to be submissive or to always be good and polite and to do the right thing. And of course, like a lot of those traits are positives, but I think when you're boxed in a certain way and you're expected to be dutiful and to follow in line and not to be your own person, that's what I really wanted to push back on and something that I have struggled with.
In my own community, young women, particularly young women from Muslim and Middle Eastern backgrounds, have been taught to be quite shy and hold their tongue and to be submissive. And unfortunately, this does have numerous different roll-on effects that can affect how a young woman chooses to speak up when she experiences issues like sexual abuse and violence.
So, how can we make sure we have the freedom to challenge expectations that are no longer good for us?
There are real cultural shifts happening. At home, girls are being empowered to speak up for themselves and set their boundaries.
When we see one woman speak up about injustice, this really influences the next generation of young women to continue to call out systems that don't serve us.
And more boys are being encouraged to share their emotions.
It's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to cry. It's actually good for you to get things off your chest. And if that means the only way to do that is to get some tears going and having a minute to yourself to get that out, then that's okay.
In the classroom, better education around consent and sex is being taught.
And in relationships, everyone is understanding that sex is an act of intimacy, not conquest. All together, we're changing things. So everyone feels in control of their decision to have or not to have sex, and nobody feels pressure to have sex when they don't want to.
I don't think there needs to be this particular role or set of expectations.
Men and women are way more similar than we think, I feel. It's not about being like a man or a woman, it's about like we're all human.
There are gender norms that are baked into society that still exist. They are getting better, though we are having more conversations about relationships and consent and gender norms.
At the same time, we've seen a surge of narratives online that are reinstating where we were decades ago.
Gendered expectations are certainly not a thing of the past. I think it is really concerning to see the rise of this incel culture.
Incel culture is on the rise from my perspective, and I think nowadays I feel more of a pressure to hide my queer identity than I maybe did 5 years ago.
The involuntarily celibate culture, whereby young boys or men feel deserving or feel the right to sex with a woman. And if a woman doesn't want to have sex with them, that's the woman's fault, not the young man's fault or the man's fault.
You're just seeing history repeat itself with all these podcasts come up where these alpha males talk about women shouldn't have this. Like, I've heard a lot of stuff.
There's just so much on the media of everyone, of what someone says that a girl should be doing or shouldn't be doing.
No, I think it's just putting a bit of toxicity out there that doesn't need to be there.
So how do we keep pushing for positive change?
You don't have to follow them. You know, it's up to you. Yeah, it's an expectation, but it's society's expectation and it's not your job to fulfill that expectation. It's, you know, you can do whatever you want.
I never blame my parents for having maybe different ideas and opinions to me, especially when it comes to gender and relationships, because this is what they were brought up with, this is what they know.
I think the best way to express your gender is whatever you feel comfortable with, whatever feels right for you, and you shouldn't be allowing outside opinions to sort of conform your gender. Whatever you feel comfortable with makes you you, so you should keep with that.
We're starting to really see powerful, strong women who aren't afraid to use their voice in jobs and in life, so that's really exciting.
Everyone should be able to express themselves because ideally we live in a world where everyone's as happy as possible, and I don't see why anybody wouldn't want that.
We've seen that gender is shaped by culture, traditions, and social trends.
While biological sex is assigned at birth, gender expectations are a social construct.
And these constructs only become a problem when they limit people, cause harm, or create overt power imbalances that make practicing true consent difficult.
Masculinity and femininity come with deep histories and traditions that have been built over thousands of years.
So we're not saying being masculine or feminine is bad. What we need to consider is how enforcing gender expectations as rules people have to follow can contribute to the statistics we often hear about.
The sort of messages and belief systems and the social norms underneath that suggests, you know, objectification, the power imbalance, and we know, through research and evidence what that can lead to in terms of sexual violence, and it's horrifying.
With femininity, we mostly associate being polite and being gentle and being nurturing. Masculine traits might be like confidence and like being brave and being stoic and things like that. People can kind of feel like they're walking along a line and like can grab things here and there as they go and don't just have to sit down one end, and they can only associate with what's over here.
It's very liberating to step away from gendered expectations of masculinity.
I'm grateful that there is space to evolve there.
A lot of gendered expectations will not suit us and will not work for us because we are all so unique. We are not exactly the same as the person next to us. And if we can work to challenge these ideas, it actually allows us to, feel more connected to our bodies and also more connected to our needs and our desires, and for that not to get clouded by these expectations around what we should be.